So we're going to run our tests. All looks good. Now let's kick off the actual run here. So one thing I could do to cheat is actually looking at our database, right? The last run completed because when we ran it, the last step that we had implemented was the deep dive step. And then, of course, it finished. If I simply change this to in progress, I could even use failed. Either should work. I've never actually made changes through this interface, but I don't see why this shouldn't work. So let's try this out. So now we've marked the most recent run as in progress. Deep dive is the last step that was completed. So now if we go back here and we pass in the resume parameter that we added last time, that'll also give us a nice way to test that this is actually working properly. So in theory, it should skip the fetch, triage, and all of that and start immediately at the writer step. So let's try this out. Sure enough, it's starting at the writer step. And this should actually be pretty quick because it's just a single LLM call. There's some input, there's some output, and yep, there it already finished. I didn't even have to artificially speed this up for the course. Okay, so what do we have here? Subject, passports for AI agents. Your current security tools are built for humans. That's a massive problem when your workforce is made of AI. Okay, so we have our file in here. So let's take a quick look in the database. There we have newsletter posts. So we only have this one right now. The preview text. Here's the whole markdown content. We're actually going to look at this in the file version. That'll be a bit nicer to look at. But it's all there. And yeah, that's all we have. So let's look in the file system. Here's our output directory. This, by the way, is already listed in our git ignore file as ignored. So whatever you have in here won't be committed to Git. This file will always be overwritten every time you run the pipeline. If you want to change that, you totally can, right? You could include something like the current date or the run ID or something like that in the file name and save them all in here. But we still have the database as the canonical location. So the file is really more for convenience, so we can quickly inspect things. But plenty of opportunity to, change this based on whatever works best for you. We have the markdown file here. What we could do is actually open up the markdown preview. Let's try this. That gives us a little bit of a nicer view in here. All right. So we have the signal. The game is changing from simple chatbots that talk. I like how it's using things like emphasis, right, for talk and do. Companies are building fleets of AI agents to execute complex multi-step tasks. And as NVIDIA prepares to launch its open-source AI agent platform, NemoClaw, the agent economy is about to hit escape velocity. Okay, I'm not going to read the whole thing. Let's just quickly scan through this, make sure that the structure looks good. So the signal, the problem, we have the solution, agent passport, it used as a name. Actually, we already saw that in the business model that was generated in the deep dive, right? So as a reminder, the business model is really where a lot of the heavy lifting happened. That's where we generated all of the individual pieces of information that ultimately allowed the writer to just turn it into a nice post. So it didn't really have to come up with a lot of stuff from scratch here. That was all fed in through the business model. And that's really the whole point of this pipeline. We can have each step kind of successively refine things until we get the final output. The business case, broken up into the revenue model. That's what we looked at before. Free tier, pro tier, enterprise tier. And then we have the go-to market. I like this. Forget Super Bowl ads. You're going straight to the source. So we're targeting open source, launch on Hacker News, partner up with a vector database company like Pinecone for a webinar. Okay, we have the moat, why now, and the builder's corner. So one thing I'm not seeing, let's look at the Markdown code again, just to make sure. One thing I'm not seeing is article citations. That's interesting. So let's see, because I know it mentioned, where was this? Yeah, here, for example, in the problem, as one VentureBeat article put it, enterprise identity was built for humans, not AI agents. So clearly there is a reference there, but it didn't actually add the article citation. Let's look at AI Studio and see what the input looked like here. See if the articles were correctly included in the input. Okay, so here is AI Studio. Here we see the request, write a newsletter post. Okay, so this is just our system prompt. And then here's where we feed in all the actual candidate and business model information. And in fact, I see something here. Okay, yeah, so some of these fields, like the candidate, actually had article IDs in here. But of course, this wouldn't be helpful to the writer because I don't think we're... Well, let's take a look below. But we might not be including these IDs. So it's not going to be able to make any sense of these. That still might not hurt. Let's see what else we're passing in here. See, it's quite a lot of input. Everything from the business model, go-to-market strategy. Okay, so here we have the source articles. So for each article, we have a title, we have the source, and then we have the actual article URL. So they are in there. And then here's the output. Okay. So the input looks reasonable. I might actually copy this because this will be helpful context for Claude when we ask it to improve this. And actually, let's commit what we have. First stab at writer step, because we'll improve this, but the foundation is there. And I always like to have nice checkpoints in Git that I can easily get back to if needed. Okay, so here's the prompt that I wrote. The writer step works, but it didn't include any actual article links in the Markdown output. I confirmed that article URLs were correctly passed in the input. See the full input below. One observation, some of the fields, for example, why now, include article UUIDs that the deep dive agent had included in the response, but the articles passed into the writer step don't include IDs, so the writer agent wouldn't be able to tie these back to the articles. Suggestions. And then I'm adding two suggestions here. One, include article UUIDs in the article list in the user prompt. And two, instruct the writer agent to make sure to include at least one article link in the output, and preferably more, as many as makes sense. Sometimes a little bit of force, like emphasizing that you really must include at least one of these things can be helpful. And then I added input and then pasted everything I just copied from Google AI Studio. So let's see what it makes of this. We'll kick this off. I also want to acknowledge that, this is a pretty somewhat detailed prompt, I guess. I did a bunch of diagnosis. It calls it a good diagnosis. So it's really up to you whether you want to, how much of this you want to try to do yourself and then sort of nudge it in that direction. Or you could even just say, hey, there are no article links, figure out what's going on and see how far it gets by itself. So let's see what it did. Article IDs on prompt. Each article in the source list now includes its UUID. So the writer agent can match them to the UUIDs referenced in candidate fields like why now. Okay. And then two, stronger citation instruction. The system prompt. All right, let's just take a look at the diffs here. Okay, so you must include at least one inline markdown link to a source article, and preferably several. Use the article URLs provided in the input, example, VentureBeat, venturebeat.com, blah, blah, blah. Okay, let's run this again and see what happens. So we'll create another fresh article, including the full pipeline run. Okay, so the pipeline finished. We had a whole bunch of new articles to process, so triage, extraction, and everything. It generated 3 new candidates. This time actually the friction point idea one, auditing the Medicaid gold rush. All right, that's something different. It's not AI related. Well, we'll see. We did a deep dive, proposed an idea called Audit Proof ABA, a pre-submission compliance dashboard that helps autism therapy clinics catch costly Medicaid billing errors before they lead to audits and clawbacks. For a flat monthly fee, we check 100% of your claims against the latest federal and state-specific rules, ensuring you get paid correctly and on time. Okay, and then we turned this into a newsletter in the writer step. So slightly more catchy headline here. The 2.2 billion Medicaid gold rush you've never heard of. A preview. All right, let's look at the generated newsletter. Here we go. And see, there's a article citation right there. A recent investigation by the Wall Street Journal. And then we have a link here. Revealed a modern day gold rush. Let's scroll down. Just the one though. Okay, let's actually look at the input one more time in AI Studio. Okay, so here is the user prompt, source articles. So we actually had just a single article citation in here. So, okay, there wasn't really anything else for the writer step to add. It feels like there might be some opportunity to tune parts of the pipeline to make sure that we end up with more article citations for each idea, because in general, the whole point is that we want to pick ideas that, have a bunch of articles that are backing it up. Doesn't have to be the case. I mean, especially for things like our rabbit hole idea, it's totally reasonable to just have like one interesting thing and latch onto that. Still, for a lot of these, I would expect to be able to find more than one. Let's run it one more time. See how much of a pattern this actually is. Okay, here's our output. So it wrote something about a startup called Locus AI, something about site selection intelligence platform. This one looks much better, actually. So here we have, actually, let's look at this in the preview. That's a little bit nicer. All right, giants like Amazon are raising record-breaking debt just to keep up. Here we have local opposition is fierce, tensions in the Middle East threatening planned build-outs. Yeah, this one has a bunch, including some in Why Now, and we didn't even specifically instruct it to put them there anymore. It just figured out that this is kind of a logical place for these, as profiled by Bloomberg. Let's click on one or two of these, make sure that they're not hallucinated. Okay, so this is a real article. Let's try another one up here. Maybe this. Okay, CNBC. Okay, so these are all real articles. So this looks much better. I'm going to say for now, let's just keep an eye on it. Maybe the one example we looked at just now was a bit of a fluke where we only had a single article. And again, if that turns out to be a pattern, then we can just work with Claude and see if we can figure out what's leading to that. If we need to improve earlier parts of the pipeline to make sure that we have more source articles, or wherever the problem might be. So I'm going to commit our changes here. Cool. So with that, we are done with the writer step. So we now have the actual markdown newsletter post. So in the next step, we're going to make it a little bit more visually interesting by generating a header image.